Welcome to the Forest Harvest CBNE Forum 2021. Thank you for joining us this week as we foster information exchange, capacity enhancement, market engagement, and political action in support of the community-based NTFP enterprises. Please welcome our moderator for this session, Dr. Dennis Garrity, the chairman of Evergreening Alliance, a partnership to restore degraded land and enhance the livelihoods of millions of smallholder farm families. He is a system agronomist and a research leader focusing on improving small-scale farming system in the tropics. Please help me welcome Dr. Garrity.
Thank you, and hello, everybody. It's a privilege to facilitate this special session, which we will be exploring how investments in landscape restoration are growing rapidly and how grassroots communities and their NTFP enterprises may be able to benefit from such investments if correctly conceived and executed. Can I have the first slide, please? It seems that this is a topic that has received very little attention so far in the NTFP community. So it should be quite an interesting exploration today. We hope to stimulate an animated conversation about it, and thus we've provided ample time not only for presentations, but also for open discussion and Q&A. The session will draw particular attention to investing in global and regional platforms that provide the foundation for mobilizing large amounts of resources for restoration. But also we'll focus on how grassroots organizations can participate and benefit from these resources and initiatives. For after all, it's at the grassroots, at the community level, where actual restoration is done, nurtured, and sustained. We'll be touching upon the private sector initiatives, large and small as well, and on building partnerships. We'll examine how community-based NTFP enterprises can be developed and supported to play a critical role in the conservation and restoration of landscapes to improve community welfare and to enhance land care and biodiversity in the future. Our discussion is organized into three layers, as you can see in this slide: the global, the regional, and the country level. For the next hour and a half, we'll be hearing from several experts in this field, starting with the global context, followed by the Asia regional context, and then a country context, spotlighting Indonesia. Please note that we'll be recording this session, and we'll also be translating the dialogue into several languages. If you need a translation, please click Interpretation at the bottom of your screen, and you may mute or unmute the original speaker. Enter your comments and questions in the chat box. So please use the chat box so that we can hear from you and we can react to your comments and questions. Next slide, please. Now, I would like to begin by giving some background on investing in evergreening the earth from the grassroots up. The global picture will explain the foundation for accelerating investments in landscape restoration that you're seeing now across the globe. Community-based NTFP enterprises are all about income generation at the grassroots and the conservation of natural resources through forest protection and sustainable harvest of forest resources. CBNEs can be major players in this new world of carbon investments. We'll be focusing on how community-based NTFP enterprises could place themselves in a favorable position to benefit from the future flow of investments in carbon and ecosystems services. Next slide, please. The climate emergency is real. And without drastic efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it will become a climate catastrophe. This is the trend in emissions reductions that is essential to reduce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to keep us within 1.5 degree territory during the next 3 decades. This process is now universally acclaimed as the race to zero by mid-century. It has galvanized over 70 governments and more than 2,500 companies to formally commit to attain zero emissions. This is one of the bright spots in an otherwise very worrisome situation. Global emissions have got to be headed down sharply by 2030 and continue down toward near zero by 2040 and 2050. But we will need to go in even further than this. We must be able to draw down massive amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by mid-century in addition, in order to stabilize global temperatures. Now hold that thought, as I will be returning to this graph in a few moments to examine how our efforts in restoration can get the world into negative emissions territory. Next slide, please. I chair the board of the Global Evergreening Alliance. The Alliance now has over 50 member organizations, and they include virtually all of the biggest development and conservation NGOs working around the world, as well as many regional, national, and local organizations, and also key research organizations that provide technical support. The Alliance's mission is to achieve massive impact in land restoration globally. It has mobilized its members and partners in the United Nations and in governments throughout the world to implement regional and national restoration programs. Next slide, please. We know that we needed to do more than simply engage in restoration. We needed to spearhead a big, audacious goal to inspire action at all levels, from the global right down to the individual community, to take urgent action on restoration. The evidence shows clearly the enormous potential for nature-based solutions to be a cornerstone of the carbon dioxide drawdown effort. We added up the streams of realistic possibilities, and we established a goal to be capturing 20 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year by mid-century, while improving livelihoods and caring better for the land. That goal is the basis for the Evergreening the Earth Green Up to Cool Down campaign, which was launched at the United Nations a year and a half ago. And we are determined to achieve it. Next slide. Now let's look back at the emissions graph again. I have now added in the annual absorption of carbon dioxide by the oceans and the land base. Together, they are already drawing down 20 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year, which makes it possible for the world to achieve net zero emissions by 2040 or so. The campaign projects that an acceleration of landscape restoration with nature-based solutions, as already being done in many parts of the world, will enable the drawdown of an additional 20 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year that have already been deposited in the atmosphere. By succeeding in the Evergreening the Earth campaign, we will be well into negative emissions territory by mid-century, as shown by the blue zone in the bottom of this graph. Next slide, please. So we have a race to restore, and it has gained enormous momentum. Hundreds of corporations are now searching for projects to support that will restore degraded lands and produce carbon credits that will enable these companies to meet their emissions goals. It is evident that during the next few years, billions of dollars will be committed to carbon projects. Hundreds of such projects are already underway around the world. The question is, to what degree might rural communities and their NTFP enterprises benefit from such investments? and mitigate the risks that are also inherent in getting engaged in such types of projects. Next slide, please. There are a couple of billion hectares of degraded lands that could be the focus of such carbon credit restoration projects. You'll note the areas of such lands are particularly widespread throughout Southeast Asia, South Asia, and East Asia. Next slide. So how does this restoration occur in ways that benefit local communities? Our global evergreening goal is made up of target areas for capturing and storing more carbon in the world's landscapes. We've laid out unique strategies for each ecosystem: degraded farmland restoration, degraded forest land restoration, and degraded rangeland restoration. All of these require specific strategies and practices that are cost-effective and highly scalable. Next slide. One of the most promising methods for forest restoration is assisted natural regeneration. It's a practice that FAO has been advocating for many years. Here's a watershed in Bohol Island in the central Philippines that has been restored by local communities through assisted and enriched natural regeneration. And this watershed has been highlighted as a model for such community-led efforts throughout Southeast Asia. Next slide, please. So how can we mobilize from the grassroots up? Well, there are three things that are important in doing this and getting it going at a large scale. One is the detailed mapping of tree cover to be able to change a tree cover and to monitor it at high resolution. Second, and very important, we need participatory local land use development plans to be developed at the community level, to mobilize what can be done and what could be most valuable at each community's basis in order to achieve a useful result. And finally, we need to mobilize governance at the community and local governance levels in order to support these efforts at the grassroots. Next slide. In conclusion, as nature-based solutions attract more and more attention to attract massive public and private sector investments in the global carbon market, clarity is needed on who benefits from selling carbon offsets, and this is an urgent need. A new analysis has just been published by the Rights and Resources Initiative that has shown that few countries have actually defined the community rights to carbon sufficiently to ensure that carbon offsets projects that are implemented by those communities will sufficiently assure their rights. So obviously, a certain degree of care and due diligence is needed to protect community rights while they explore the fast expanding opportunities to benefit from such investments. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a trade-off that at each community and each NTFP enterprise needs to carefully assess. And it's an area where NGOs who are dedicated to the best interests of Indigenous communities can provide an important source of guidance in this area. Opportunities and risks. I look forward to our exploring these further as we proceed through our session today. That's it from my side to start us off. Now I'd like to continue shaping the global context and call upon Ms. Pauline Buffel to talk about private investments in forest landscape restoration. Ms. Buffel is Program Officer at the Forest Program of the International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, or IUCN. Pauline has done a great deal of work on policy-related climate change, and she's been working with forest and farm producers organizations around the world to raise their profile and ensure that they are recognized for their key role in forest protection and landscape restoration. Please welcome Pauline to share her remarks on private investment in forest landscape restoration. Take it away, Pauline.
Thank you very much, Dennis. I hope the sound is okay. Thank you. I'm very happy. I'm very happy to be here and start sharing some of the thinking that we've been doing in IUCN with the Forest and Farm Facility around private investment in restoration. Next, please. So to start with, I would just like to take you very briefly through the definition of what we mean by forest landscape restoration. Forest landscape restoration is based on 7 principles. First of all, it takes a landscape perspective, meaning that we're not looking only at farms, we're looking at the interaction between the forest and the farm and the river, and we're really looking at a bigger scale. We can do forest landscape restoration on different land uses, right? So it's about maintaining, conserving, or restoring existing forests, but it also mean restoring agricultural land. One of the third principle, which is a crucial criteria, is that for us, forest landscape restoration, or FLR, is about actively engaging stakeholders, including the vulnerable groups, in planning and decision-making regarding land use and restoration. The fourth principle is that the interventions must be tailored to the local cultural and social context. It's not about a top-down decision about imposing some tree species, some big plantations on land that is used for other matters. It's about restoring multiple functions. That's the fifth criteria. So again, it goes back to the different aspects, but for multiple benefits. So you can restore land to improve the water quality. You can restore land to increase the yields and the productivity of soil that has been degraded. But you can also restore mangroves to improve their protection, your protection against sea level rise or storms. And the seventh principle is that it's a long-term process. It's for long-term resilience. That's why it also needs quite some upfront investment. So next. Thank you. So I know colleagues will go through this a bit later on Asia, but I'd just like to give you a little taste of some of the research and perspectives for Asia. Currently degraded areas on the continent include expanding deserts in mainland China, India, Iran, and Mongolia or Pakistan. It's the problems of sand dunes of Central Asia, but also steeply eroded mountain slopes of Nepal and deforestation and overgrazed highlands of Laos. So as you can see, and of course, the decreasing soil fertility all across Asia and the world for that matter. So degradation can have multiple aspects. But the thing is that in Asia, given that the Asia holds more than half of the world's population, and that this half, nearly 70%, live in rural areas and depend directly on land, Asia is actually the continent most severely affected by land degradation in terms of the number of people affected. So, for example, the total annual loss in terms of crop production, because the soil less fertile, is the topsoil loss is about 50% of annual total crop production. So it's really a dramatic problem, and something needs to be done. Next, please. But so to address this challenge at the high level around the world, governments have pledged to initiatives like the Bonn Challenge, but also through reducing emission from deforestation and degradation, REDD+ policies, or simply forest policies. So at the national level, there's a lot of pledges. Here you can see a little list of some of the countries where actually in policy, set in the books, in the legislation, there should be all those hectares to be restored by 2030. So that's a lot. I mean, if you look at the 15 million in China or the 13 million in India. But now the question, it's very nice. So those are the national pledges and the government pledges. It's a very important step, but they won't be able to do it alone, and they won't be able to do it only on government land. Of course, that's where the private sector enters into account. Next, please. So so what would be the interest of the private sector? And here I think it's important to note that the private sector are community enterprises, are smallholders as much as multinationals and international companies. So I think sometimes there might be different interests for restoration, but I think there's a common link, a common ground for all those smallholders, forest and farm producer organization, cooperatives, and big international companies. Is restoration can increase productivity of land, but it can also secure the supply chains. It can manage risk and increase the resilience by diversifying products on farm, for example. It can help with resilience to climate change and natural disaster, like the example of mangroves, or for climate change, planting more trees to retain moist and things like that, or buffer planting. Those are all some of the useful interventions that could be done at different levels. Yes, you can, and as Dennis went through, of course, there's a carbon sequestration to contribute to climate change mitigation. There's this whole discussion that Dennis mentioned. Yes, you can go to the next. So just to give more example on what can be done at landscape level with smallholders. I mean, the idea is that you can get into agroforestry systems. This will help with your soil, but you can also help with protecting forests upstream to ensure that the water flow is more secure, and that you have more water and better quality water. It can bring back a lot of biodiversity. It can bring back a lot of new plants, but of course, all of this can be done to give more added livelihoods. Next, please.
2 more minutes.
Yeah. And so that's where actually the role of forest and farm producer organization, of cooperatives, of NTFP enterprises, they can help their members restore landscape by improving the access to technical support to look at the choice of species for restoration on farm. But then once you have this new species on your farm, you need to find access to market. You need to understand how to develop your small business. And of course, producer organizations have a big role to play to lobby for improved land tenure, because nobody will invest if it's more difficult to invest for long-term processes if you don't have improved land, good, secure land tenure. And finally, for that, producer organization need from their governments and the private and the bigger multinational a seat at the decision-making table, but also direct investment to contribute to restoration and de-risking initiatives from the government to encourage growth of FFPO enterprises and TFP enterprises that would contribute to restoration. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Pauline. I think that that was a good context setting for our discussions today. And for our participants, do be sure to enter your questions in the chat box. We will want to address them during the Q&A. Now, let us move on to the Asian regional context. And my friend, Mr. Thomas Hofer, is the Senior Forest Officer of the Food and Agriculture Organization in Asia. He is a great champion of landscape restoration and how governments, NGOs, and communities can collaborate to set targets and implement effective restoration programs. Thomas, could you share your views on the work that you're doing on the development of a new regional forest landscape restoration platform? Take it away, Thomas.
Thank you, Dennis. With pleasure, I will. I'm available to share a few thoughts on our regional activities. If I can have the first slide, yes, you just go on with the next one. So, first, this slide here, colleagues, basically shows, and I think Pauline has used a similar one, is basically showing what is, in fact, the potential in Asia for restoration. And you see that more than 400 million hectares of degraded lands are potentially available for restoration in Asia. This is an estimate of the Global Partnership on Forest and Landscape Restoration. And you see here a breakdown in the 3 sub-regions, but I think it's a huge potential and a huge, how to say, responsibility, as Dennis put it so well in the first, in his keynote. Next slide, please. Now, within Asia, I don't know if you are aware, we have an Asia-Pacific Forestry Commission, which is an FAO commission, but where all the countries are represented by their heads of forest service. And you see here, when we had the session in the Philippines in the February 2016, the APFC, the Asia Pacific Forestry Commission, requested the development of a regional strategy and action plan for forest and landscape restoration. You see, so a very strong commitment from the government side to move in the direction of really restoring degraded forest lands. And you see that there was a strong consultation, and then in the session in Sri Lanka in 2017, this action plan was endorsed for implementation. And this provides a broad framework within which countries can define action plans that fit to national context. So it's a broad framework which needs to be specified in the countries according to their needs. Next one, please. And you see there are 6 strategic priorities in this action plan. The first one is, again, targeting national plans for forest and landscape restoration. The second one is promoting regional dialogue, learning, collaboration, and coordinated action. So it's an exchange of best practices, of lessons learned, and coordination. The third one is to building recognition for and support of the use of various technical, social, and institutional approaches. So it's more the techniques, how to implement forest and landscape restoration in practice. So it's not just a physical implementation on the ground, but it's also the social and institutional mechanisms which are important. 4 and 5 are more related to financing. You see mobilizing financing for FLR and involving the private sector. And I put the last one in red because it's particularly relevant for this audience, because it also requests for support communities at the community level for actions on the ground on FLR. So you see, it's a broad framework. And with the next 2 slides, I want to show how FAO, can I have the next slide? We at FAO, in the Food and Agriculture Organization, we said it's nice to have a regional action plan, but it's even nicer if we really do something with this action plan. So what we are doing right now is we have a small project which is ongoing since a few months. It's a technical cooperation program of FAO. And what is the objective of this project is to really catalyze a massive regional restoration movement. So we have the framework within the APFC, but we would like to catalyze a massive restoration movement by maximizing the opportunities of forest sector contributions, you see, to green recovery by mobilizing resources from all sources for scaling up. We have at the moment 7 countries which are participating in this exercise. You see Bangladesh, Laos, PDR, Myanmar, Nepal, Pakistan, Papua New Guinea, and Timor-Leste. And this is a project which at the moment is going for 2 years, but it is also extendable. And it's a great pleasure to have Dennis Garrity, our moderator of this session. He's our senior advisor of this project. Next slide, please. So, next slide, please. So the project has, in fact, 4 main components. You see, the first is a capacity building component, because there is so much experience out there, and what we want to achieve is to basically use this experience and create capacities at all levels on the restoration implementation. National restoration action plans developed. So we have resources to support 2 of these countries which are participating to really develop a national restoration action plan. It is also, because we are talking about regional work here, the third objective is to develop a regional cooperation platform and partnerships, data lab in the region, whatever we call it, to really share this experience. And finally, as Dennis said, ultimately, we hope that this will lead to a regional consortium to scale up restoration through a regional program. So the framework is the APFC action plan. And with this project, we hope to bring all the key partners in the region together who have experience in FLR from different entry points, to bring all this energy together and to really scale up restoration through a regional program. Now, with the next slide, I would like to bring us back again to the field level, because we are talking here about NTFP enterprise. We are talking about the local level. And I follow a little bit what Pauline was saying, because here you see that actually restoration on the ground have a lot of different options. So there is ANR, there is agroforestry, there is home gardens, there is tree planting on slopes, there is natural regeneration in buffered zones of protected areas. It's improved management of natural forests, which means that restoration is not just about restoring degraded forests, but it's also making sure that intact forests are not getting into a degraded status. So you see, these are all options. So forest landscape restoration is not just one thing, it's a number of different activities on the ground. And the next slide shows what are the benefits at the local level. It's a question of temperature, you know, it's a question of leveling extreme temperatures. It's a question for providing habitats for biodiversity, wildlife, pollinators. It's maybe a touristic aspect restoration, improving soil quality, improving water quality, regulate water flows and sequester and store carbon. You see, so there are many different ways to do landscape restoration, forest landscape restoration, and there are so many benefits, local benefits to do that. Let me come to my last 2 slides, please. Within this framework I presented, we have a number of field projects ongoing in different countries. I don't have time to explain, but what these 2 slides, which I'm showing now, are is an analysis of what are some of the key success factors for restoration. And it's very interesting that all those I highlighted in yellow here, they refer to the local level, they refer to the field level, they refer to the small enterprises, you see. So the first one is obviously the national support. There needs to be an enabling environment at the national level. But at the local level, there is a need for clear institutional arrangements, roles and responsibilities between, communities, between small enterprises, between the NGOs working on the ground and so on. Supportive policy and legal framework, that's again a national level mainly thing. Then we come again to the field level. The tenure rights are so important. If the tenure rights are not clear, forest landscape restoration is very difficult to implement. And finally, the participatory multi-stakeholder approach, and you see especially the local community involvement, which also has addresses the social aspects, is critical. Next slide, please. And to make sure that landscape restoration is attractive for local communities or for small enterprises, there needs to be a design or there needs to be a clear incentive mechanism to show that landscape restoration is an effort, yes, but it has a lot of benefits, and we showed them before. So what are the benefits, incentives for local communities, for local enterprises to participate? This is very important. Diversification of forest goods and services. You see there are all these ecosystem values which are there when we do landscape restoration, and they need to be valued, they need to be considered, they need to be in fact quantified to be able to upscale. And finally, long-term financing investment strategies, this was already mentioned, and very importantly, the last one, flexibility to adapt and to changing needs and conditions. So when we embark on a landscape restoration effort at the local level, we should not have a concept which is written in stone. It has to be flexible. We have to be adapted to the evolving situation, be it from the environmental point of view or from the socioeconomic point of view. I think, last slide, I think that's what I wanted to present to you today. I hope that was useful. And back to you, Dennis, for your further moderation. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thanks so much for these remarks and insights, Thomas. I really liked your slides of all the important ways that communities can restore their landscapes. That was really excellent. And since this session focuses on the community basis, so the grassroots, that's really the basis for how we can proceed for large-scale restoration. Well, next I would like to call on another dear colleague, Dr. Delia Katakutan. Delia is a senior fellow with the Global Evergreening Alliance and senior scientist and regional coordinator for the Southeast Asia program of the World Agroforestry Center. Delia has over 20 years of experience in the research on social and policy dimensions of agroforestry and integrated natural resources management in Asia and Africa. And I would note that she was the lead author of the ASEAN guidelines on agroforestry development. Now, I'd like you, Delia, to brief us a little on the Landscape Partnership Asia, which is another new platform focusing on restoration in the drylands and drought-prone areas. Delia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dennis, for this opportunity and to the organizers for this opportunity to share, to introduce the Landscape Partnership Asia. Next slide, please. So, so what is Landscape Partnership Asia? So it is a partnership that is evolving and is focused on multi-stakeholder implementing performance-based investments. Let me just Okay, sorry. Okay, so Landscape Partnership Asia is a multi-stakeholder partnership platform that will implement performance-based investments in the restoration of Asian drylands and drought-prone areas through networks of engagement landscapes, deploying evidence-based techniques. These investments will mitigate the climate crisis, build resilience of forest, I would like to emphasize forest here, rangelands and agricultural landscapes, and improve the livelihoods of local communities. This initiative will link to other restoration initiatives such as the Bonn Challenge, the UN Decade of Ecosystems Restoration, and the FAO, FAO Asia Pacific's Forest Landscape Restoration Platform that Thomas Halfer just mentioned a while ago. And the objective is actually to create synergies amongst those different commitments. Next slide, please. So the Landscape Partnership Asia was founded or established by four founding partners. The first is the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization, AFOCO, which is an intergovernmental organization committed to strengthening forest cooperation in Asia. And AFOCO is based in Seoul, South Korea. The other founding partners are Center for International Forestry Research, C4, and the World Agroforestry, or ICRAF, together C4 ICRAF. Last but not the least, the fourth founding partner is the Global Evergreening Alliance, or GEA, which is being chaired by no less than Dennis Garrity, our chair. So those four founding partners have been working together over the last a year or so already in forming this major partnership for landscape restoration focusing in the drylands. So why are we focusing on the drylands? So the emphasis of LPA is on the drylands because despite the growing number of global initiatives on landscape restoration, there's still not enough of it that produce results the way we wanted to achieve. Drylands, as we all know, and dry forests represent 41% of the world's land area and are inhabited by 2 billion people. And Asia has the largest share of the world's drylands. 10 to 20% of the drylands suffer from land degradation. And according to research, the expansion of degraded drylands will cover 56% of the global land surface if there is no remediation measures taken. So given the context of drylands, specifically Asian drylands, a target initiative for restoring drylands is needed to support national and international goals on sustainable development. Based on data that we collected from 6 countries, and that these countries are Cambodia, Indonesia, Mongolia, Myanmar, Philippines, and Kazakhstan. And this is based on a survey. These 6 countries cover over 200 million hectares of degraded lands. And the restoration targets is less than 17 million hectares. Much of this 200 million hectares are actually degraded drylands. So as you can see, there is a huge gap between the extent of degraded lands against the restoration targets. Obviously, governments are facing difficulties in achieving current targets and much more with increasing them. So there is always, inadequacy in the resources available for restoration, particularly in the drylands. So LPA aims to, the big ambition of LPA is to contribute to national and international targets on the restoration of forests, agricultural drylands, and drought-prone areas in the East, in the Central, East, South, and Southeast Asian regions, with an initial 10 million hectares brought under integrated dryland and drought-prone management by 2032. And all of this, of course, will be contributing to the Bonn Challenge, to the UN Decade for Ecosystems Restoration. So how do we achieve that? So there are 4 areas of the LPA work. First is through robust partnerships amongst government, technical, implementing, funding partners, and local communities. So we emphasize local communities, and I'm going to speak a little more of the role of local communities later on. Second is to mobilize financial, human, and technical resources, as well as policy support. Third is to build networks and networks of engagement landscapes where all partners work together to achieve transformational change within those landscapes. And the last but not the least is to deploy proven scalable solutions. We all know that there has been a lot of restoration options presented and a lot of experiences. We're not really starting from scratch. There has been robust experience on ANR, on FMNR, and even on agroforestry that we can build on. And our goal is actually to accelerate and scale up those practices that have worked in various areas. So why do we need such a partnership? Why do we need to build a LPA? 4 reasons. First is that because there is high around 176 million hectares. Yet, again, research suggests that over 400 million hectares are actually available for restoration. And national governments and local communities need support and assistance. So in other words, one single government could not address or could not achieve their own targets single-handedly. So there is really a need to collaborate to build robust partnership to achieve those targets. So far, LPA has 13 participating countries and it is still expanding. They are Bhutan, Brunei Darussalam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Laos PDR, Mongolia, Myanmar, Philippines, Thailand, Timor-Leste, and Vietnam. And there are more to come in the coming days. Okay, so what will the partnership do? So this is what I would like to emphasize now. This is here where I would like to focus on community-based initiatives on non-timber forest products and focusing on enterprises. So as you can see, the partnership aims to implement 3. So the first is expanding the scale of proven restoration approaches. So as we know, as I said, there has been many restoration approaches available. All we need to do is actually to identify what works best for particular areas and scale it up to potential areas that have similar conditions. The second is training and capacity building. So we wanted to develop innovative participatory technical training packages, build the capacity of target groups, and build sustainable production and marketing capacities. And this is where local communities and community-based forest enterprises that are already existing or new ones can really actively participate. Third is expanding the scale of financial mechanisms. And I would like to highlight on the 4th bullet point here, which is identifying and piloting business opportunities. As we hear through, this is the 5th day of the forum, 4th day or 5th day of the CBNE forum. And we hear a lot of experiences from the communities around business, NTFP business enterprises. So LPA also aims to support those, NTFP struggling or thriving, or even identify new business opportunities for non-timber forest products to help restore as a means and as one aspect of forest restoration. So this is where the experiences of those community groups that have presented from day one of this forum, and even from the video that we hear at the start of this webinar, the experiences of groups in the Philippines, in India, and in Indonesia in building forest-based enterprises. The 4th aspect is small grant schemes, developing small grant schemes to assess financial mechanisms. Again, although this is primarily targeted to governments who wanted to establish to create their own platforms or conduct research around restoration. This can be also applicable to local communities who would wish to explore, for example, new ideas, new innovations around restoration. In this case, community-based forest enterprises as a very important livelihood aspect of forest restoration. The fifth aspect is enable policy and mainstreaming. So we would like to establish policy working groups, engage the larger companies, private sector at the national level, and work directly with regional policy bodies that includes ASEAN. And last but not the least, knowledge management and monitoring and evaluation. So we have started already setting our baselines.
Time to wind up.
Okay.
Time to wind up. Yeah.
Yes, one last. So, okay, and finally, the creation of an Asian Drylands Knowledge Hub, which is a platform for knowledge sharing and learning, exchanges. Last slide, please, I think. Last slide, please. Okay, so how can we all contribute? Governments, implementing partners, technical and funding partners all have their own roles to play in enriching the LPA and achieving the 10 million hectares. So in the very near future, we would like to get in touch with even community-based organizations to join us in LPA. So thank you very much. Dennis, I'm sorry for the overtime. The last slide, please, has an address for in case you're interested to learn more about LPA. The secretariat is being hosted by FAO, and there is a contact person there with the email address. So feel free to contact the secretariat of LPA. Thank you very much.
Delia. Thanks, Delia. And indeed, the drylands and their people are so often neglected. And I'm so happy to see this particular initiative take off. We hope that a strong partnership can be developed between the NTFP network and the LPA, because we can then benefit the communities involved in the NTFP network through that program. Well, now we shift our focus down to the case of a specific country, which is Indonesia. Our first speaker from Indonesia will set the country context. His name is Mr. Jusupta Tarigan, the director of NTFP-EP in Indonesia. And Jusupta is a forestry and livelihood specialist focusing on identifying and developing integrated development approaches that enable local stakeholders to sustainably manage natural resources. Pa Jusupta, we know that Indonesia is implementing a vast social forestry program across thousands of communities and is struggling to assist those communities to attain sufficient capacity to implement and build their own community-based forest enterprises. So could you discuss for us the topic of investing in social forestry capacity building in Indonesia? The floor is yours. You're on mute, I believe. You need to unmute.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Pak Dennis, for a long introduction of myself. I will try to stick 5 minutes as the host have already give the time for me. My presentation, please, next slide, please. The investing of the social forestry capacity building in Indonesia. I start with this data from the social forestry enterprise board under the Ministry of Environment and Partnership in Indonesia. So social forestry scheme in Indonesia, they divided into 5. So, but from 5 scheme, if you seen the screen, so the village forest or hutan desa is the most progressive right now. The Indonesian government already allocated and programmed 12.7 million, but later it's already revised for 5 years until 2025. But if we see the current progress, I think it's still far away from the targeted is 12.7 million. Right now, and up to December 2020, only 3 million hectares allocated or give a permit or right to the community to managing the forest. Even though there is an indicative customary forest or hutan adat is around 1 million, so the total is only 4 million up to December 2020. So it is still far away from the targeted the government. So next slide, please. Yeah, from almost 5 million hectare already allocated, there is 7,000, more than 7,000 social enterprise and forestry enterprise already established with the multi-commodity, but majority is agroforestry product, fruits, ecotourism, timber, etc. But if we see in the classification of the social forestry enterprise, only 1% categorized as the platinum class, but the majority is still under the blue classification. What doesn't mean platinum? Platinum means the social forestry enterprise already run their enterprise even with the small market. They already have enhanced capacity and also skill and knowledge and network. But gold, silver, still, and then also blue is still established, but doesn't run well the enterprise. So there's still a lot of work to work together to support the social forestry in Indonesia. Next, please. Yeah, why we should invest capacity building in social forestry in Indonesia? Regarding to the goals of the social forestry in Indonesia, there's 5 focus of the Ministry of Environment and Partnership in Indonesia regarding to the capacity building. First is about the planning, how the social or the social forestry group can well planning their area, their hutan, their forest. And also the second is they already have like a boundary setting their area. They should also have the strengthening their institutional and also increasing human resource improvement. And the last is, of course, about the entrepreneurship development. From 5 goals or focus of social forestry regarding to the capacity building, based on our last discussion with the BUPSA. BUPSA is a social enterprise board under the Ministry of Forestry and Partnership. The biggest gap is still in the entrepreneur issue for the social forestry owner or groups in Indonesia. So last week I invited by the Ministry of Forestry and Partnership to give them a coaching clinic with 100 of social forestry enterprise, and we seen that there's still a big gap among them to know about the enterprise. So that's why the NTFP Indonesia, together with other NGOs, other institutions, and also stakeholders in Indonesia, tried to build a coalition to support a social forestry program in Indonesia to support the capacity building for the social forestry group. So we believe that no one institution in Indonesia can solve this problem. So that's why collaborate and also building a strong coalition to support social forestry in Indonesia is a must and also very important. So right now NTFP Indonesia together with ICRAF and other institutions like Rakov TC and also I think a lot of NGO now already have informal coalition to support this initiative, and hopefully for future we can also make this more formal and to support the government for social forestry group. That's all, Pak Dennis. I hope I save time. Thank you. Back to you, Pak Dennis.
There we go. Okay, a little trouble unmuting myself there. But thank you so much, Pak Jusukta. excellent overview of the social forestry program in Indonesia and the progress and challenges that it's facing. I know that there is now an initiative forming to support social forestry enterprises across the country. And it is a program that I'm sure many people will want to watch closely because it is so large and so all-encompassing and could be so impactful in the future. Well, our last speaker today is Mr. Gerhard Manurung of C4ICRAF. Pa Gerhard has spent decades working with farmer associations and enterprises on agroforestry development. I know because I've worked and associated with Pa Gerhard for many, many years. And I'd like you to join us in presenting some of your reflections on investing in landscape restoration with a particular focus on East Sumba, where you have had a major role for a number of years in working in that unique environment. Pa Gerhard, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pak Dennis. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here from Indonesia. I would like to share our experience related to the activity focusing on the community-based land restoration for economic development integrated drylands of Sumba Timur, Indonesia. So this activity was conducted under the project we run together with World Vision Indonesia Australia, ICRAF Indonesia, and World Relief Indonesia, funded by the government of Australia. In the project we call Indonesian Rural Economic Development Project, started from 2016 to 2018. Next, please. So the project was implemented in Sumba Island, in southeast part of Indonesia, where the landscape and livelihood of the project sites in Haharu was very, very poor. The condition, you can see the landscape of the Sumba Timur was the degraded limestone savannas with the scattered trees in the valley. And this area also very, very semi-arid situation with annual rainfall less than 300 millimeters a year over the 2-3 months annually with fire annually and open grazing by the local community. Of course, water shortage and limited food security and market access for the livelihood of the farmers. And the situation of the income, economic situation of a household is very low annual income for them. It's about $1,000 US per year. In 2016 to 2018. Next, please. So to improve the situation, the condition under the project, Indonesian Rural Economic Development Project, we try to target, to improve sustainable smallholders' food security and poverty reduction through restoring degraded lands, by scaling up the adoption of climate-smart agricultural practice and value chain development. So how to achieve this objective? We conduct several activities under focus group discussion. We did extension trainings through the trainings of trainers and farmers to farmers, research trials and farmer demonstration trials. And the last one is a value chain development. Next, please. As you know, that the land use system in Sumba Timur, particularly in Haharu sites, farmers run some land use systems. Mostly, they run some farms in riverbanks. They call it mondu, where they plant wet paddy, maize, and others food crops that close to the nearby river. And also mostly of the landscape are marada, they call it, which is a savanna, where the FMNR farmers manage the natural resources, which is the cane trees with the local grass. And also they farm some valley land by planting rainfed paddy and some crops, food crops. And they also they farm some area of the savanna by doing woka palindi and woka uma, by planting some food crops and tree crops. And the last one is forested area where they keep protect some trees, indigenous trees like a sandalwood, injuatu, and other exotic timber trees. Most activity are run by the men and women for all the land use systems, but the situation is very, very poor there at the time. Next, please. So one of the focus discussion we conducted, we more focused to the division of works for the farm activity. As we know here that the for garden or farms that close to the their area, their household, their house, women more focus on the nursery, selling, planting, and harvesting activities. But if the garden or the farms is quite far and located in valley, men will be more dominantly to do some activity like to sell the product, to do post-harvest processing, to maintain the land and crops, and then land clearing or land opening. Next, please. So the extension training, we started by training of trainers by train about 18 farmers champions, and now they are become farmers extensionists, and then they train farmers, their neighborhood farmers, to do some extension trainings. Next, please. So this is these are the achievements of the activity through the training of trainers. The 18 farmers extensionists trained to promote the good agricultural practices and the agroforestry, and also to protect and to do farmer managed natural resources to other farmers, and through the farmers to farmers. We train through the farm extensionists about more than 1,600 farmers. 40% of the farmers, the trained farmers, are women, to increase their knowledge and capacity to do good agricultural practices, agroforestry, FMNR, in the bi-weekly training events. So from about 150 trained farmers, from more than 1,600 farmers, they already adopt and apply GAP and doing agroforestry practices in about the 120 hectares. So about more than 24,000 trees have been planted, where 70% of the tree seedlings produced by nurseries of farmers are timber species, and the 30% of the tree seedlings are the fruit species, including the food crops. Next, please. The other activity to extend, to improve the capacity of farmers, we conduct research trials and also the farmers demonstration trials by applying to the farmers to introduce the good agricultural practices, including the agroforestry practices. So we can see in the table that some crops like peanuts can be through the good agricultural practices can be increased the productivity and also the revenue. The turmeric, based on our research trial, can be increased. Cassava and sweet potato also have been increased, but cassava, sweet potato, they use to improve their food security for their family. Next, please. The other achievement was the 103 nurseries with good quality germplasm established and managed by farmers, as we see in the picture. About 25 hectares of the FMNR plots had been enriched by planting with the timber, other crops, including the Leucaena leucocephala and the Leucidia sepium. So in totally, more than 4,000 400 hectares land of the Haharu site had been rehabilitated through the FMNR, farm demonstration trial, nurseries, planting of tree crops, improved fire management, improved grazing practice, and improved market links. So as this activity started working together with the local government, district government, at the end of the project, the district government, particularly the district agricultural extension and forestry agency, including village governments, they agreed to employ, to hire the 18 farmer extensionists to follow up, to conduct extension trainings that funded by village fund provided by our national government. Next, please. The last activity related to the value chain development, through the value chain development that was run by Lutheran World Unit in this project. Also, we conduct the good agricultural practices, as I mentioned before, good post-harvest management, strengthening organizational capacity at farm level, and also the practices to how to manage the product by delaying the selling of the product and selling the product collectively. And the last one, they farms have been facilitated with the some buyers, particularly the turmeric buyers in local market. Next, please. I think that's all that I would like to share with you. Back to you, Pak Dennis Gerini. Thank you.
Very good, Pak Gerhard. You know, the story of East Sumba, I think, is a very, very important one, and a particularly important one for the drylands. Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for some questions and discussion. Some of you have been typing your questions into the chat box, and I've been putting them together, and I've got some questions ready for each of our speakers. Let's start off with Pauline and Thomas. The question is, how do you see the ways that local communities can play a truly important role in the regional and national efforts that you've outlined in your remarks at the global and regional level? Maybe I could ask Pauline to take a shot at that question and then a follow up from Thomas. Pauline?
Yes, thank you. So I think that those regional initiatives cannot be met without the local level. I think it's as simple as that, is that governments, national governments and entities and bigger companies need to acknowledge that. So I think that's why sometimes doing some policy influencing and raising your profile, it's a lot about communication, but that's also where sometimes organization and facilities like the forest and farm facilities are here for that. I mean, for example, we're increasingly also working with the Asian Farmers Association. So all those apex and organizations for policy influencing, I think that's where some lobbying work needs to be done. But any local government or national government needs to understand that they cannot do anything without local communities.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Pauline. Thomas, would you like to add your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, Dennis, I mean, that would merit even a separate event, this question, no? Because it's a very nice one. But
that's true.
Just to make it very simple, I think, as Pauline said, you know, for us, whenever we engage in a project on landscape restoration or even other projects, the institution mechanism is always to have a link between a provincial and national level with the local communities. And without that, it doesn't work. But it also doesn't work just by working with local communities or just with governments. I mean, ultimately, we always call it's not a top-down or bottom-up approach. It's a negotiation, it's a dialogue, it's a partnership among all of these. Because ultimately, if we want to have a benefit in the long term for local communities, the needs of local communities and the engagement of local communities in the project is essential to be, finally upscaled at the policy level, and vice versa. I mean, when we work with communities, we also need to respect and reflect what are the institutional arrangements, be it at the provincial or national level, in terms of governmental rules. So it's ultimately, it's a partnership between all these different stakeholders, and that's very important. And that's why any activity which should have a long-term success and perspective needs to involve local communities, but equally other stakeholders at the national level or at the provincial level, because ultimately these experiences need to be upscaled. Because maybe just to add one more thought, projects we are talking about, they need to work with pilot activities, because we can never cover a whole, landscape of a whole country with a project. So it's always a question of pilots in the end. And that's where the communities who are part of this pilot are so important. But then the initiative, the sustainability of the initiative depends on the enabling environment and on the ownership taken by the government to really upscale this this approach and to make sure more communities benefit and more communities are engaged. I don't know if that's the message I wanted to give. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Thomas. We have a couple of questions that are specifically directed to our Indonesian speakers. Let me start with the question that just came in on social forestry. It was asked to Pa Jusupta. The social forestry program in Indonesia has existed since the previous government's period. I think the real problem is post-permission. What do you think? Pa Jusupta?
Yeah, thank you, Pa Dennis. Thank you, Pa Edison. I think I already answered in the chat box, but yeah, I agree with Pa Edison. So yeah, as I mentioned in the chat box, so in the first few meetings with the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, in the beginning of social forestry, so I suggested to the Ministry of Forestry that the permit regime should also parallel with the post permit, because if not, this will be we will in the problem. So, for instance, in some area in Sulawesi, Kalimantan, and also in Papua, when we visited the social forestry group, they also always come up with the complaining, what's the benefit of social forestry for us? We know there is a lot of trees, a lot of something. So, but we don't have capacity, we don't have a network, we don't have a skill how to utilize this social forestry area. So yeah, I agree with Edison. So that's why in my presentation, so it is time to us in Indonesia to build a coalition, a strong coalition, because no one of organization can do it by themselves, and also the Ministry of Forestry. So we have to create a strong coalition to support the big task. As I mentioned, it's only 1% is categorized as the platinum, but I'm not sure 1%. Yeah, it's just a number, but in the reality, I believe it's still none of the can categorize as the platinum. That's Pa Dennis. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Pa Jusupta. We have a question for Delia. Del, the question is, how can we ensure the right social safeguards for rural communities and indigenous peoples so they can truly benefit from restoration investments in their local area, and particularly carbon offsets projects in particular? How to mitigate the risks of being taken advantage of when they engage in such projects? Delia?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dennis. It's such a challenging question. Yeah, I think there are a number of ways, and I'm not saying that, and I think it should be, we should be using multiple approaches, because the problems with rights and safeguards is just, it's just enormous. So one is that any project, any carbon project should follow and should abide with the rules of the countries and the communities. In the case of the Philippines, there's an FPIC procedure that this carbon project should abide to, and I think a similar approach or similar procedure is also being adopted in other countries. So that's just one, but some of these are really just are procedural, but the negotiations are, that's where the nitty-gritty part of the process entails. So I think that really what is really important is someone who is what we call an honest broker between local communities and this, let's say, carbon buyers, sort of. So there is a need for this credible, honest carbon brokers, or what we call, in some cases we call it boundary organizations, who can really cross the bridge between these two entities. And boundary organizations are very important in negotiations, because they ought to be neutral, and they ought to be protecting, of course, the knowledge, and drawing on knowledge from different sources, so that no knowledge, no decision, or no idea is left behind. So two things then is, first is, of course, to follow what is in place already, the rules and procedures adopted by the countries. And second is to identify that knowledge broker, or that boundary organization, who can do the negotiations in a very honest way, because that is where the more serious negotiations will take place. Yeah.
I think that's a very, very well stated position, the need for boundary organizations that really care about the rights and the privileges of local organizations to be an intermediary in these kind of projects. I wonder if any of other speakers have thoughts about this. This is a very, very critical issue. And the Rights and Resources report that just came out yesterday went into quite some detail about this. And it's often a big, big problem in many countries. They did mention that Vietnam, the Philippines, and Indonesia are three of the rare countries that have a legal framework for basing restoration and carbon projects in particular. So they're a little bit ahead of many other countries, but there are still gaps and problems. Are there any other of our speakers that might like to comment on this really important issue of getting communities involved with restoration without negatively affecting their interests in doing so? Everyone's shaking their heads. No one is saying anything. Oh, Thomas is there. I see your hand, Thomas. Yes.
Yeah, just one additional sentence. And I think in this whole equation, the question of the tenure rights and the clarity of tenure, is such an important thing in this question, I think. And that's why, I put this also in my presentation. One of the experiences really for local community, as long as the tenure rights are not clear, and then this whole question of which is being discussed here will not be successful, I think. Yeah,
that's right, exactly. Pauline, did you want to come in? I saw you shaking your head there. Yeah.
No, I'm just so I think I don't have a specific example, but I think it is quite powerful for local communities to get organized together, to whoever is facing those kind of issues. I think really the strength in number is something we always say in the Forest and Farm Facility, but I think that's really quite powerful, because not only when you have difficult discussions with local government or whoever is behind it, I think you're taking much more seriously, but also you can share knowledge, you can share experience, you can share a lot of capacity also, and then you can interact maybe with national groups that are more informed. So yes, I think getting organized together is very important.
Thank you very much. And Gerhard, you have worked on the ground with farmer groups, farmer association, farmers enterprises for many, many years. What are your concerns about ensuring that these enterprises at the local level are not disadvantaged when they work to either provide products or provide services such as environmental services, carbon, watershed services, etc.? What are your thoughts about how to avoid these kinds of problems?
Well, in local community, mostly local community in Indonesia, they still think to provide their needs, to provide their foods for their family actually, and but based on the situation, if their area is quite close to the marketplace to accept or to receive their products. So then they have access to sell their products. Again, in local community level, they still have a lot of limitation, how to access the market, how to improve their capacity to do the entrepreneurship. So, but this has not supported by our government yet, particularly for the technical agencies in government's level, and starting from national to the district level. So a lot of homeworks actually, Pak Dennis, that we have to conduct to involve, to engage local community to access the market or enterprise products in the market level. I agree with what Thomas said, that the issue, the land tenure issue is the big problem as well. To improve farmer capacity, since not only the local community face the situation with the large plantation, for example, company, but also with the local king, for example, who already have the land with the large area, and smallholder farmers cannot access the land as well. So quite many problems and homeworks that we need to address to improve access farmers to the market. I think back to you, Pat Dennis.
Thank you, Gerhard. Yeah, and I'm sure that the new social forestry program, which is attempting to develop contracts and agreements, formal agreements with communities, thousands of communities around the country, is trying to develop those mechanisms that can provide the formalization of land tenure, tree tenure rights, and support for enterprises like non-timber forest products as well. So there is an attempt to make to really make this now a major part of government assistance to local communities. Let's see how successful it is. We have probably time for just one more question before we wrap up. And this was actually addressed to me. So I'm not going to be off the hook, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to have to answer one question myself. And so it says, as you speak about carbon financing and how it can support community restoration, especially restoration and including non-timber forest products, how does that really work? And I think that's an excellent question, because in so many cases, the development of the mechanisms for, let's say, carbon projects are being worked out, and the methodologies for doing that are under development. But from our experience so far, and there have been hundreds of such projects applied, implemented around the globe. Basically, you start off with a buyer, and that's usually a business, a corporation that has an emissions gap, and it wants to buy on the voluntary carbon market a certain number of tons of carbon dioxide to meet that gap, because it's committed to having zero emissions. So then you need an organization that is technically capable of negotiating with the corporation to create a contract to deliver the carbon dioxide. It's a product that has to be delivered, and that's measured on the ground in terms of tree carbon, soil carbon, etc. And so that organization needs the technical competence to do this. And this is the real gap we have right now, is that so few organizations have the deep technical knowledge and experience to negotiate and then implement these projects. And then, as Delia mentioned, I believe, these organizations need to be working in line with and in support of the communities who are actually doing the restoration, who are planting trees, regenerating forests, etc., and developing non-timber forest product enterprises to take advantage of those resources. And so that organization is the critical middle ground. That she called it a boundary organization. It's on the boundary between the communities and the corporations or whoever is buying the carbon. And one of the things I think we need to keep in mind from the NTFP network is how we can foster communications, partnerships, collaboration with these kind of boundary organizations, whether they're NGOs or even businesses that are working in this area, to get the right partnerships to foster these developments that can provide significant funding to local communities. I'm familiar with one project in Kenya, for example, that has about 250,000 acres, or about 120,000 hectares of area with local communities drawing benefits from 18 different corporations who pooled their money through a given organization called Wildlife Works that implements with the communities the activities that sequester the carbon, and then shares the carbon benefits, the financial benefits, with each of the communities who are sacrificing to improve their livelihoods and their environment through their activities in protecting and restoring forests. And so that's an example of one particularly large project that can provide a lot of insights. It's been going on for about 12 years now. So there's a lot of experience, and you can look it up on the web. It's called Wildlife Works, and get a lot of detailed information about how they actually do that. And I think we need to learn a lot more. Well, we're at the end of our program today, and to wrap up, just to remind ourselves that this session has highlighted the accelerating global momentum to the race to zero, and to build a massive resource base to invest in restoration. As I mentioned, billions of dollars are on the drawing board. We also highlighted the new platforms that are falling into place in Asia to promote massive restoration throughout the region. And in Indonesia, we've looked at the challenges and opportunities to build the capacity of thousands of community-based organizations to develop their NTFPs, their agroforestry, their forestry management enterprises suited to their local conditions. And we hope that we've opened up some new avenues for connecting the big top-down programs and the opportunities to restore landscapes from the grassroots up. So I want to wish a very warm thank you to all of our speakers, to our audience participating. And now please join us for the next session as we highlight products from Vietnam in the marketplace. And we hope that you'll join us in the last few sessions in this great forum. Thanks again, everyone, and onwards.
Thank you very much, Dennis, and to all of our speakers. I think before we leave, the hosts would like to take a picture of all of us, all 92 of us. So, Bani or whoever is the one that does this very well, can you tell us when we should smile?
Okay, Mbak Chrissy, wait a minute. So we're gonna take picture. So here we have, wait, we have 5 slides.
Don't go anywhere.
Okay, we're gonna start the taking picture on my count. First, in 3, 2, 1. Okay, second. 3, 2, 1. Okay, I think we're done. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And